Okay, everyone, welcome to Is Your Organization Ready for STEPs? It's great to have you here today to talk about AASLH's STEPs program. Feel free to post questions in the Q&A as we go along, and we will be sure and answer them. We do have some handouts for you at the end of the webinar, including a table showing the differences between various assessment programs and some other handouts for you. And these will all be available in your dashboard within the AASLH Resource Center. So my name is Sherry Cook, and I am Senior Program Manager at AASLH. I'm happy to be here with you today, and joining me is my colleague, Alex Collins. Alex is Program Coordinator at AASLH. So over the next 50 minutes or so, we want to introduce you to all of the aspects of the STEPs program, including enrollment, benefits, resources, everything that you may have questions about, and what is offered with the program fee. So we're going to start by describing the nuts and bolts of STEPs, talk about readiness, and finally show you a few examples of how organizations are using the program to help them make meaningful improvements. But first I want to take a quick poll just to kind of see where we are with the audience. And so if, Alex, if you want to bring up that poll, has your organization taken part in any assessment programs in the past? And, yes, no, or maybe you're not sure. Maybe you haven't been there a long time and you're not sure. But give me a good idea of whether or not our audience members are familiar with assessment programs and by having taken part in them. So I'll let you all answer that poll. And I'll give you just a few seconds more, and then Alex will bring up the results. Okay, so here we have, so 40% of the audience says no, and the same amount is not sure, and that's very common. 20%, two people, they have taken part in some type of assessment program, so that's good. We do have a good mix, and you might, if your organization is one of the two that have taken part in a program, you can always let us know which program that is down in the chat. So let's get moving on talking about the STEPs program. So one of the first things that I want to say is that, and I know all of you know this, we all have so much work that has to be done, and the work that needs to be done at all of the museums and historic sites and historical societies across our country, that work is endless, and we all know that. But as we also know, our energy and our resources are not limitless. And so one of the biggest advantages that I see about using an assessment program like STEPs is that it can be a valuable tool for moving an organization forward, because assessment programs provide the structure that helps everyone within an organization to move in the same direction toward a set of common goals. And so from what I've seen with organizations that use assessment programs, they are better able to connect their planning, their decision making, and fundraising to an assessment program, which also helps to give them credibility. So an organization that's using an assessment program can let its community know, let its board know, let its other stakeholders know that the things that they are asking for funding for, or the decisions that the organization is making, can be justified. And funders like to know that. They like to know that your strategic plan is based on real standards, national standards, and that you can measure your progress by benchmarking yourself against those national standards and the performance indicators in the STEPs program, which you'll see in just a few minutes. So you have a much easier time when you're using an assessment program to articulate your goals and to describe and report on your success when you can connect all of that to the same benchmarks that museums across the country are also working toward. So I have another poll that I want to ask, and this time you can just answer in the chat box. So if anyone has specific issues that you're hoping a program like STEPs will help your organization to address, why don't you post them in the chat box so that we can see, are there issues like communication or planning and setting goals, or other issues that perhaps you're hoping or you're looking for an assessment program to help your organization work on and address. Just go ahead and post that in the chat box. And I'm going to keep moving on, and I may come back to the chat box in a few minutes and see if anyone has posted anything in there. Okay? So let's see. I think, Alex, I think I'm ready for you to move on and talk with everyone about STEPs.
Okay, that sounds great. Can everyone hear me okay? Sherry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, just making sure it's good. Okay, so we'll get started. So the Standards and Excellence for Program for History Organizations, or STEPs, as we like to call it, is an assessment program offered by us, AASLH. Its development was a grassroots effort by the field for the field. More than 135 volunteers from 37 states helped create the program. STEPs is a self-study program open to any museum, historical society, historic house site, or related organization. It is intended for small and mid-sized organizations that do not feel ready for other assessment programs. But larger museums will find the program useful as well as a refresher checklist and training tool. Unlike other assessment programs, STEPs does not have an application period, nor does it have eligibility requirements. STEPs is flexible in how you can use the program, and I'll talk a little bit about the different approaches you can take when you're working your way through the program. So STEPs enrollment. STEPs was first introduced to the field almost 10 years ago, and since then, more than 1,000 organizations have enrolled in the program. As I mentioned, STEPs has no eligibility requirements and no application. There is a one-time fee, and enrollees must be an ASLH institutional member for at least the first year, but we hope you will continue your membership because publications you receive from us and webinars you have the opportunity to view will actually help you with your STEPs work. The STEPs workbook and website are included in the fee, as well as the opportunity to earn progress certificates. I'm going to talk about each of those a little more in detail in a few minutes. You will also receive national recognition for certificates earned, a window decal, and discounts on AASLH workshops, webinars, courses, and more. Organizations can enroll online on the AASLH website at aaslh.org, by phone, or by printing and mailing the enrollment form. We've actually provided you a PDF copy of the enrollment form, and you'll find that in your dashboard after today's webinar. So let's first talk about the STEPs workbook. The STEPs workbook is at the core of the program. It's an easy-to-use spiral-bound book. There are 6 standard sections, which you can see them listed out on this workbook cover on the slide. It's easy to use, and you can address those 6 standard sections in any order, but we recommend starting with the first section, mission, vision, and governance. It's a good place to start. A nice benefit of the workbook is that it documents an organization's progress, which is really valuable when there are transitions in paid and unpaid staff, as well as with board members. So here is an example from the workbook itself, and this is showing on the left, you can see the standards section. Right in the middle, you'll see a self-assessment question. And then on the far right are the performance indicators. The specific recommendations in the column on the right, those performance indicators, are the missing link that the museum field has been asking for. They answer the question, how do we know when an organization is meeting a standard? The boxes you cannot check off are opportunities for improvement. The workbook actually makes it easy for you to make notes about those opportunities on the opposite page. We don't have that here, but there's an opposite page where you can take down notes, and then you can easily see possible projects to include in your organization's annual list of goals or long-range plan. The great thing about the STEPs program is that with the basic, good, and better levels, it offers a flexible way to work incrementally towards making improvements. We do understand that every organization is not going to reach that gold level in every part of the workbook, but with STEPs, you at least know what you are striving for instead of guessing at what those expectations are for museums. So whether your organization works on STEPs within a group, which I actually highly recommend, or alone, it can make significant progress without spending a lot of money. Many suggested changes in the STEPs program involve communication and consensus building instead of money. And we've listed out a few of those project options that are really more time than money, because we all know that money and funding can be really limited. So in talking about ways you can work through the workbook, like we said, each section of the workbook stands on its own. So you can start with a section you prefer and work what we say vertically through the basic, good, and better performance indicators per section. However, as I mentioned before, we do recommend starting with that mission, vision, and governance section first. So if you would like to first earn bronze, silver, and gold certificates in one section before moving on to the next, that's what we kind of refer to as that vertical method approach to the workbook. The second method we talk about a lot is the horizontal method. This is where you work to earn a bronze certificate in all 6 sections, then move on to earning silver, and so on. We personally like the horizontal method best because it can fairly quickly elevate your organization to that basic level. Many performance indicators are about awareness as opposed to doing something. And by working through all 6 sections of the workbook at that basic level first, you have the ability to fill in some really important gaps early on. For example, you might learn going through that approach that your organization is really in need of a collections management policy, and you can get that in place early on to help you meet those higher standards and indicators later. This method also helps people from getting overwhelmed if they fixate on good and better performance indicators that might seem a little difficult to reach. And it also provides opportunity for early success, which in turn motivates everyone within your organization to keep going in the program. So we're going to take another quick poll just to see what approach you think might work best for your organization. So I'm going to launch that now, and I'll give everyone a few seconds to tackle that poll. All right, looks like mostly everyone has answered the poll, so I'll go ahead and end that now. share the results. So it looks like most everyone is looking at that horizontal method, which, like I said, is a really good approach, but whatever works for your organization, of course, is always the best way to go. So let me close this out real quick. We'll move on. So you may have heard that this year we are starting a review of the workbook to see what needs to be added since the material, like we mentioned earlier, is almost 10 years old. I want to reassure you, however, organizations that are already enrolled will not need to start over, so I don't want anyone to worry about that. The new version of the workbook won't be ready until 2020. And even then, we will allow use of both the old and new versions for at least 18 months. So if you want to go ahead and enroll in the program, don't feel like you have to wait for that enhancement version to come out. So one of our resources that we have to help you move through the program is our STEPs online community. And when you enroll in the program, you have unlimited access to this site, and even more than one person at your organization can have access to this site. So everyone can have their own unique username and password to log in. And we highly recommend that, especially if you have multiple, say, board members or staff members working to go through the program. It's really helpful if everyone can access these resources online. So some of the resources you'll find there are sample forms, policies, job descriptions. We also have discussion forums, which are really great with communicating with other STEPs program enrollees. It's really great to get feedback and kind of hash out some similar problems that everyone's facing with one another in the program. We also post a lot of free webinar recordings there, and we make announcements about the program as well. So let's talk about those bronze, silver, and gold certificates. Once your organization is meeting all basic indicators in, say, the management section, for example, you complete that form at the end of the section and then mail it into us here at ASLH. And then we send a bronze certificate for that management section. Same thing for silver and bronze, or silver and gold. These certificates can be framed and displayed in your facility to let visitors, board members, and your community know that you are working towards meeting National Museum standards. The certificates also work really well as leverage when you are requesting funds or applying for grants and justifying why you need X amount of dollars for equipment, new exhibits, more staff, more storage materials, whatever you think, whatever your organization needs. I do want to clarify with the certificates, though, the difference between certificate and certification. STEP certificates recognize completion of a section of the STEPs workbook at either that basic, good, or better level. They are earned completely through the honor systems. Therefore, they do not grant certification, a seal of approval, or an endorsement. So just keep that in mind. One of our other many resources we offer to help you in earning those certificates is our STEPs Lab webinar series. STEPs Labs are webinars that provide in-depth information on topics from the STEPs workbook that are central to the operation of museums, historic sites, and houses. We have several recordings from past STEPs Labs available in our Resource Center with topics that include budgeting, handling, donations, strategic planning, and more. So make sure you check that out after today's webinar. Now I will turn things back over to Sherry, who will discuss some examples of organizations putting all of this from the STEPs program into practice.
Thanks, Alex. And don't forget, everyone, if you do have questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A. So I want to tell you a little bit about something we learned during the pilot phase of the STEPs program. It was a pilot program that involved about 40 historic sites and museums across the country. And as we worked with them and then went through an evaluation phase at the end of the pilot project, a very valuable thing that we learned was that STEPs participants find working within a group to be especially helpful. It's that support group or community of practice model that offers accountability, it offers shared learning, networking, and camaraderie. All of those things that adult learners really want and need. And so we actually started several years ago encouraging the formation of STEPs groups. And we believe that participation in a STEPs group, whether it's a state-based group or a regional-based, or perhaps it's a group of historic houses within an urban area, anything like that, we believe that participation in a STEPs group really offers an excellent opportunity for organizations to make meaningful progress in the STEPs program because it is a self-study program. Sometimes it's easy for organizations to get off track. Perhaps they have a really busy spring school tour season and they have to stop working on STEPs for a while, and then it's hard to get back into it. But if you work within a group, you may find that your accountability to that group will keep you going through the program. Now, there are several examples of state groups. There is a group in Connecticut. There is another group in Utah. There's a group in New Jersey and some other states as well. And these groups are all different. Some of them are informal. Perhaps they meet once a year at their state association meeting. Others may meet for a few workshops, and yet others are very well structured and funded, like Connecticut's, which is funded by its State Humanities Council, and they have a series of workshops, and they have mentors and on-site visits, and Utah has just started a program like that as well. So if you're interested in a STEPs group, let me know. Contact me by email or phone, and I would be more than happy to talk with you about the possibility of getting a STEPs group started in your state or in your area. So let's talk a little bit about, is your organization ready for STEPs? Because after all, that is the title of this webinar. And so here are some questions, the next couple of slides, that you and others within your organization may want to ask and think about as you're considering enrolling in STEPs or using any other assessment program. So it's not uncommon, as many of you probably know, for an organization to find itself in a rut. And sometimes this can happen for many years. If you believe that your organization is in a rut, I encourage you to consider using an assessment program to help you climb out of that rut and get moving again. And there are many reasons for organizations to be in a rut. And as I said, it can happen for, it can happen for a couple of years. It can happen even for a couple of decades. And as I worked with field services a number of years ago in the state of Oklahoma, I would often come across groups who would tell me that they were indeed in a rut, and they just didn't really know what to do next. They felt like everything was against them in terms of lack of volunteers or lack of funding, and so everything just kind of stagnated, and they really didn't know where to turn. So if by chance you feel like your organization might be in a rut, maybe for a short term, or maybe it's been long term, I want to take a quick poll and see whether or not any of these issues may be at the focus of why you think you might be in a rut. And some of these, and it may be several of them. Is it because your organization doesn't have clear priorities? Is it because you always are starting new initiatives, but there are no time to complete those initiatives? Oftentimes we get focused on day-to-day tasks instead of looking at the big picture, and that's very easy for all of us to do in our jobs, is to jump from one thing to the next without looking at the big picture. So go ahead and answer that and tell us what you think it primarily may be due to. And maybe it's all of the above or something else. So I'll give you just a second to do that. Okay, Alex, do we have any results? Let's see what we have. Okay. Well, all of the above jumps out in front, and that's not uncommon. 3 people said it's something else. Okay, so looks like it's a little bit of everything. Great. Okay, we can close that poll. Let's move on to, I want to talk about another question that you might want to ask. And that is, in thinking about taking part in an assessment program, is your organization open to discussing issues that some people may find uncomfortable because those discussions may involve talking about changing or ending long-held traditions, long-held practices. It's the old, that's the way we've always done it problem. Do you have people who don't want to give up control, or you have a lack of division between board and staff, and so people's roles kind of bleed over into areas where they really shouldn't be making decisions. So these things can be uncomfortable and difficult to talk about and to address. An assessment program like STEPs can help you do that, so long as you're open to having those discussions. But it can open the door to those discussions. And within the workbook, we have these fictional stories. They're called, it's Middletown Historical Society. And they are fictional stories about some things that go wrong at a local historical society. And there's one for each of the 6 sections of the book. And what's nice about those stories is you can use those to open up a discussion within your museum. And in talking about a fictional group about what they might do to fix their problem or to move past an obstacle, you can actually identify things that your organization might want to try. So sometimes it takes talking about, a fictional scenario to help you move past some issues within your own organization. So that's a question to ask too. Are you open to discussions? And then another one is your organization interested in improving its long-term sustainability and looking at ways it can better serve its community? An example of that is the Black Heritage Society of Washington State. And two of the things that they reported back to us that STEPs helped them with was to open up communication within their board of directors. And so that everyone on the board was using the same language in talking about the types of goals that they wanted to achieve. And I will say that helping a board of directors to communicate more clearly, but also to learn more about museum operations is probably the most frequent feedback I receive of how STEPs has helped an organization. People, they talk about how their board moves into a new phase, that they have such a better understanding of not only how a museum should operate, but what their role is within that operation. And I remember one organization from Texas told us that after they achieved their first certificate, several of the board members came up to the director and said, Now we understand what your job is, why you keep telling us we need these policies, and why you want to review the bylaws, because these are the things that you have responsibility for. And so it did, a light bulb went on for those board members when they finally understood that there was a lot more to the operation of that museum than they had previously been aware of. So that's another question to ask. And then also the group from Seattle said that being able to articulate it within a grant proposal what they needed in order to improve the management of their collections was also a huge help to them, which translates into long-term, being able to plan for long-term sustainability and caring for and managing their collections, and then of course serving their community with those collections. Another question is, are you willing to take a close look at your policies and practices? And again, sometimes there are issues with people within an organization who feel like that's not needed, or there are issues with things that may need to be updated, that people again have the attitude, the belief that, if it ain't broke, we're not going to fix it, when in fact it really is broken. And that things need to be updated. So once again, the New London Public Museum in Wisconsin reported also that their board of directors had a better understanding of how museums work as they went through the STEPs program. And then I thought it was great that this organization reported back that their strategic plan became more meaningful. It was actually based on something. As they based it on STEPs, they had a plan that not only helped them to accomplish some goals that they wanted to accomplish, but they could tie them back to STEPs, which would move them in the program, move them forward in the program so they could earn certificates. And I remember the director of the museum at New London was telling me that she even started structuring their board agendas around STEPs, so that there were reports on how the organization was progressing in STEPs, and then there was always something that they would look at within the STEPs workbook that would help to educate the board about an aspect of operations, whether it was something in management or mission, vision, and governance. They tried to spend some time in a board meeting addressing that so that people could learn more about how the museum operated. So that's another question. And then I have one more, and that is, does your organization believe that addressing national museum standards can help it build credibility and generate new opportunities? One of the examples that I have here is the Brentsville Courthouse in Virginia, and their director reported back to us that because they are affiliated with county government, that it was very important that they have some type of structure that just like the other departments within county government had, that would help them to benchmark their work, so that when the county administrators would ask, well, how do we know that you're achieving anything? What are your standards? What type of benchmarks do you have? This historic site could point to STEPs and say, we're following the STEPs program. These are the national standards. And then, as it says up on the screen, STEPs was also helpful in training their maintenance staff, their county maintenance staff, and others who were not familiar with recommended practices. It was helpful for training them in the difference between regular maintenance and perhaps maintenance that needed to be done on a historic structure that had to be done more carefully and in consultation with outside professionals who knew about paint and historic site structures. So that was another way that Rob was able to use the STEPs program. Now, lastly, I want to take just a few minutes before we take questions, and that is I want to talk a little bit about the Essex Historical Society in Connecticut and what they've been able to accomplish. This is a group that is working within that StEPs Connecticut group, and so they did have the benefit of Connecticut Humanities as a facilitator and as a guide as they went through the StEPs program. So the Essex Historical Society has reported back that they spent a lot of time in the beginning on rewriting their mission statement, going over their bylaws, crafting a vision statement for the first time. And as they said, they reported back to me, they said that they truly now believe that their organization operates from those documents, and what they do is based on those documents, which I think is something that we all hope that our organizations are doing, but we know that sometimes we tend to stray from those documents, especially if they haven't been reviewed in a number of years. And so that was one thing that Essex reported back. They also were able to create their first ever strategic plan, which was a huge accomplishment for them. And then, as they told me several times, the StEPs program helped them to address thorny issues. Things that, as they said to me, they said they would sit across the table and try to discuss issues like deferred maintenance and land use that they had danced around for a number of years, but could not come to resolutions about because people had differing opinions. There were a lot of questions, but by using the StEPs program and their mentor, they were able to sit down and have those discussions that needed to be had about especially deferred maintenance. Another thing that they talked about that they used was that space allocation. And the example that they gave was that they had an empty first floor, but they were renting off-site storage space. And so, again, it was something that they knew they needed to talk about, but there were such differing opinions that they really couldn't even begin the discussion. And so StEPs provided the foundation for those awkward discussions, and they were able to come to a resolution that it was time for them to stop paying for off-site storage and to use the space that they had. They also talked about how they finally came to an agreement within the board that moving the offices from the second floor to the first floor would improve visitor and volunteer access. And these things sound like they would be easy decisions, but when you have as you all know, when you have an organization that's been around for a long time and everyone is used to doing things a certain way, these can be difficult decisions. And as this group reported back to me, that making these accomplishments, let alone even just talking about them, would have been unheard of before they started in the StEPs program. And then lastly, they were able to use StEPs as a way to look at their historic structures at their site and how they were being underused, and to come up with a plan for how they wanted to use each of those structures. And I think one of the best parts of their report that I received that I found very encouraging and inspiring is that they saw StEPs as a vehicle for giving them permission to think creatively and to experiment. As they said, they decided they were going to take risk, and they started with things that they could undo if they thought it wasn't the right decision, and then as they started making some of those decisions, they became more confident and branched out into more complicated decisions, but that permission to take a risk and to experiment was what has propelled them forward in their organization and in meeting accomplishments that some of them really never thought would never be possible. So I think I really like this example of this organization. And granted, they did have the structure with the STEPs Connecticut group, and they had a mentor. And so, you know, some of you may be thinking, well, you wouldn't be able to make that many accomplishments. But I think you can. And will it happen in 1 year? Probably not. But as we always tell people with the STEPs program, whether you're in the program 2 years or 10 years, it's okay. It's a self-study program, and for some organizations it will take a number of years, but that's okay. At least you're moving forward, whereas if you weren't using the STEPs program or another assessment program, you would really run the risk of just being stagnant and perhaps falling into a rut. So again, I'm a strong believer in assessment programs as being a good structure, a good framework for making progress. And lastly, I want to put this up on the screen from Tori Mason at Grassmere Historic Site, which is part of the Nashville Zoo, and she is the curator at this historic house. When she enrolled her organization in STEPs, this was a historic site being run by Zoo Administration. They had no collections management. There was nothing there. I think they may have had donor forms, but nothing else. There was not a collections management policy. And so she was able to use STEPs to convince the Zoo Administration of what she needed in order to get started bringing this historic house up to speed when it came to managing the collections and taking care of the structure. So as she says, you know, you're probably able to check off more boxes than you think. And so she has found the program very helpful. So I am going to turn it back over to Alex. And folks, you can post your questions in the chat box, and we will be more than happy to answer them. Alex?
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, go ahead and pop them into that Q&A section, and we will start working through those. We'll give you a few, little bit to pop those in. While we're waiting for those to come in, I'll put a fun little cartoon up that Sherry really likes, if I can get this to work. So hopefully you're all really excited about the STEPs program and are thinking about enrolling your organization. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and let us know about those. I don't see any coming in at the moment. If you are having trouble with the Q&A, oh wait, looks like we have something. All right, we have one from Beverly. She says, for a group study, do you think it should involve staff, board, volunteers, and community members, or which group? Oh, sorry, Bev. He says.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Bev. When you have a program like this, that is one of the components of it that can be very flexible in terms of who you have working on the workbook, the sections in the workbook. And I would say absolutely I am much more in favor of a group than an individual. I've seen it where like one person, perhaps the director, goes through the workbook and answers the questions. And to me, that's not very helpful because no one else within the organization is getting the benefit of learning. But I do recommend that you think about including several different types of people in a group. And so perhaps the mission, vision, and governance section, maybe you have board and staff or volunteers working, and perhaps even someone from the community. Or if you're going the horizontal way through, you can choose people from several different areas as you look at the basic indicators. And then maybe you change it up when you get to the middle or the good level. It's very helpful to have a group, and I don't think it hurts to choose a few people from outside of board, staff, and volunteers. I would just make sure to choose people who are knowledgeable about the organization. And then, as I said, change it up. You don't have to stick with the same group. That would be a long commitment for one group of people. So, but try things out. And you might say, we're going to work on the basic indicators. As I said, try it with one group, see how it goes, and then consider changing it up for when you go through the good level.
Yeah, great question, Beverly. Beverly also commented that they have gone through the MAP program 25 years ago, and everybody is different now. So I just wanted to add that in. Thanks, Beverly. Stephanie has asked that we mentioned something about mentoring earlier and asked if we can elaborate a little bit on that. Can you do that, Sherry?
So mentoring, there are several STEPs groups that have mentoring as a component. And I think that's very, very helpful. And you may be able to, if you're going to work on STEPs but not within a group, and there's a lot of museums and historical societies across the country that may not be near a STEPs group and may not have the capability to start one themselves. But perhaps you can find someone from a nearby museum or even another nonprofit in your town to mentor you in one area of STEPs. We will provide, if you're enrolled in the program and you're interested in finding out if there are other organizations near you that are working in STEPs, I'm happy to provide that list to you. I encourage people to talk with their state museum association or their state historical society and ask them if they would be willing to start a STEPs group, so that organizations within your state or within your city or area could work together on STEPs. So we don't have the capability at this point for AASLH to offer mentors. We are looking through the enhancement program. We're looking down the road at how we can help small museums make better progress in STEPs, but we're not there yet in terms of mentors. But again, as I mentioned, Utah and Connecticut, they do have groups where their STEPs program does offer mentors. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. I don't see any other questions up. So if no one else has any other questions, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. We are getting close to the end of our time. But if you do have questions, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information, I just put that up, is on the slide, so you can reach out to either of us. We would be happy to help you. I do want to remind you that we've mentioned a few handouts throughout the webinar, so those will be available in the Resource Center within your dashboard. So make sure and look for those after today's webinar. When we close out the webinar, you will be directed to a brief survey, and we really appreciate you taking just a few minutes to complete that survey because it helps us when creating future programming. You will also receive an email notification when the recording of this webinar is available, so be on the lookout for that. Oh, see, Beverly asked one more question, so let me get that before we wrap up. Are mentors typically from more experienced museums?
Oh, that's a good question, Bev. For those programs that do have mentors, like in Connecticut and Utah, I believe that those programs are currently using consultants, people who are able to um, spend time visiting the sites that are enrolled in STEPs and to work with those museums over a period of about a year. So those mentors do have um, experience, but they're not specifically from museums, more than likely, that were in STEPs. So I hope that answers your question. So again, as I said, we are not able to offer mentors at this time. We wish we could, but we don't have that capability at this time.
And Beverly said that did answer his question, so thank you. So I don't see that any more questions have come in, so I just want to finish up by thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found this helpful and informative, and again, you can always reach out to us if you do have any questions that you didn't think of today and you think of those later as soon as we end the meeting. You know, that always happens. So, and thank you to Sherry, my wonderful co-host. It's been wonderful today. And yeah, thank you all for coming.
Likewise.
So, yeah, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We'll end the meeting, but I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.